Imagine you are a woman in England around the year 1000, and a man wants to marry you. Before you learn how charming he is, you learn that your romance has a committee. He arrives with supporters. Your relatives gather, an advocate receives his pledge, and the room begins discussing what he will give you, what property will be yours if he dies, and who will protect you if the marriage takes you far from home. His friends guarantee his promises. Your kin will eventually pledge you as his wife. It feels less like a proposal than a treaty with a honeymoon somewhere in the small print. Then one surviving instruction changes the mood. The match should proceed only if it pleases you and your friends. So who is choosing your husband? You, your family, or every person staring at you across the room? That is the puzzle of courtship in the so-called Dark Ages. Marriage was personal, but making one was public, and private feelings had to survive property, labor, kinship, religion, and the opinions of nearly everyone you knew. Historians call the centuries from roughly 500 to 1000 the early Middle Ages, and Europe had no single dating manual. Customs differed across kingdoms and communities. Ordinary couples rarely recorded their private conversations, so the evidence preserves gifts, witnesses, disputes, and rules far better than flirtation. Still, we know that courtship was not a separate activity with its own places and rituals. Possible partners appeared through relatives, neighboring households, work, worship, travel, trade, and political connections. You might have known a local candidate for years. A distant match could arrive through an intermediary. Either way, choosing a spouse also meant choosing a working partner and a new group of allies. Attraction could matter, but attraction could not harvest grain or settle an inheritance. Before the families worried about romance, they wanted answers. Could the two of you support yourselves? Was either person promised elsewhere? Were you too closely related? Would the marriage end a quarrel or deliver one directly to the door? This is why arranged marriage is not a complete answer. It suggests only two possibilities, freedom or force, when real life occupied everything between them. Your relatives might introduce someone you were allowed to refuse. You might already prefer him and recruit both families to help. Or your kin might apply so much pressure that consent became little more than the final box on a medieval checklist. A princess could connect kingdoms, redirect land, or strengthen a claim to rule, so elite children were sometimes promised long before they began living as spouses. Even the greatest love story needed somewhere to store the grain. Suppose your families approve. Now the visible courtship begins, not with serenades, but with promises. In late Anglo-Saxon England, the groom's formal pledge was called a wed, the ancestor of wedding. An advocate represented you. Trusted people witnessed the agreement. The groom and his supporters guaranteed its terms. One payment might go to those who raised you. Another gift was promised directly to you. A mourning gift, sometimes land, could become your property. Agreements among powerful families list estates, gold, cattle, horses, and people held in servitude, followed by enough witnesses to make secrecy almost impossible. From the doorway, this looks like a woman being purchased. The language of buying a wife did exist, and the bargaining reflected a deeply patriarchal society. But the exchange contains an important reversal. Not every payment went to the bride's relatives. Property granted to her could provide support during marriage and protection in widowhood. It turned promises into assets. Without a modern state ready to enforce a private agreement, land, livestock, witnesses, and guarantors gave the community something concrete to defend. Romance and economics were not rival explanations for marriage. Economics was part of keeping the new household alive. Then the church steps into the room, but not yet as the all-powerful wedding official many people imagine. A 9th century description of Roman Christian practice includes witnesses, a ring, a property settlement, and a later priestly blessing. Then admits that poverty may prevent those formalities. Across much of the early medieval West, a blessing was desirable, but a priest was not universally required to create a valid marriage. Weddings often remained domestic events that churchmen gradually entered and regulated. Marriage might unfold through pledges, gifts, a feast, the bride's move, and sexual union. That created awkward situations. Your neighbors might consider you married, while a churchman considered the union irregular, or the reverse. This uncertainty made one question increasingly important. Did both people consent? The principle sounds strikingly modern. Christian thinkers drew on Roman ideas about agreement, and in 866, a pope explained that elaborate ceremonies could be absent while the couple's consent remained essential. Without that will, Even intercourse did not create the marriage he considered valid. Late Anglo-Saxon instructions also require the woman's approval. For one moment, the crowded room begins to feel progressive. Then you notice who still controls the doors. The same sources expect parents, guardians, relatives, or other powerful people to help choose and formalize the match. Earlier church rules even disagree over the age at which a girl controlled the decision. Your answer could matter in law and religion, while being delivered before people who controlled your home, safety, and future. You could refuse, at least in theory. Men also faced family and dynastic pressure, but patriarchal institutions normally gave them more freedom and placed women in greater danger. Now suppose you love someone your family rejects. Suddenly the courtship stops being a negotiation and becomes an escape problem. Early medieval laws repeatedly address the abduction of women for marriage, although their language can blur situations that must be distinguished today: violent kidnapping, sexual assault, and an elopement arranged to defeat family opposition. Some women were brutally coerced. Some couples may have cooperated in an apparent abduction because their relatives blocked the match. Authorities often treated the event as an attack on family honor and marriage strategy, not only as harm to the woman. Whether a case began with escape or violence, it exposed the same mechanism. A decision made by two people could start a conflict among dozens because marriage redistributed property, loyalty, and obligation. Suppose everyone approves and nobody needs to climb out of anything. You still face another enemy, your own family tree. The church prohibited certain marriages between blood relatives and also recognized ties created through marriage, adoption, and baptism. The boundaries changed, and methods of counting kin confused priests as well as ordinary people. In a small community with no convenient registry, human memory had to decide whether your ideal match was actually a forbidden cousin. One forgotten great-aunt could do more damage than a bad love letter. Yet the family network was not only an obstacle, it could also protect you. One Anglo-Saxon provision imagines a bride moving into another lord's territory and requires her friends to secure guarantees that she will not be harmed. Her original community retains obligations toward her. Marriage expanded kinship, but it could isolate the person leaving home. An Old English poem gives a woman's voice to separation from her husband and protectors. Its story is disputed, but its emotional world remains painfully clear: longing, loneliness, hostile relatives, and divided loyalty. Then there is the famous claim that medieval girls normally married at 12. It is dramatic, easy to remember, and misleading. 12 for girls and 14 for boys became familiar minimum ages in medieval canon law, but a legal floor is not an average, and those rules became clearer after this period. Earlier texts disagree about when a young woman controlled decisions about her body. Elite children could be betrothed very young, but a childhood promise did not always mean immediate cohabitation or consummation, and royal strategy cannot stand in for village life. Before the year 1000, the evidence is too thin to calculate one reliable European average. Adolescents certainly married, and some girls suffered dangerously early unions, but everyone married at 12 is a legal threshold dressed up as a census. The other great myth is almost the opposite. When people imagine medieval courting, they picture knights, secret tokens, songs beneath windows, and elaborate rules of courtly love. Most of that literary tradition flourished from the 12th century onward. Giving it to a 6th or 9th century couple is like handing a Viking a Renaissance sonnet and expecting him to perform it correctly. But removing courtly love does not remove love. Early medieval people experienced attraction, tenderness, jealousy, longing, and lust. They formed unofficial unions, betrayed spouses, eloped, and had sex outside approved marriages. We know partly because legal and religious writers kept trying to stop them. People rarely build fences around behavior nobody attempts. Poetry and a rare surviving love formula also preserve a language of desire. What remains hidden is the choreography, how a glance became a preference, where a couple found privacy, or how affection changed a negotiation. The absence of farmers' love letters tells us about literacy and preservation, not about the limits of farmers' hearts. Love also did not have to arrive first. Families might expect companionship to grow from a sensible match. A couple already in love could use the public process to gain what desire alone could not provide: recognized children, property, witnesses, and allies. Those protections mattered because married life carried serious risks. A wife commonly entered a household centered on her husband, faced the dangers of pregnancy and childbirth, and had fewer paths to power than a man of similar rank. Some women controlled marital gifts or inherited under specified conditions. Widowhood could bring property and greater influence over a second marriage, but it could also make a woman a valuable target. Unfree people had even less control, since a lord's interests might determine whether partners could marry, move, or remain together. The church was still shaping its own rules as well. The standardized church marriage of later centuries was not waiting fully formed. It was still being built. Now return to the room where your courtship began. The pledge has been spoken. Property has been named. Friends have promised to enforce the terms. Someone has searched the family tree as far as memory reaches. Your answer matters, but you give it inside a structure you did not design, before people whose support may determine whether the marriage brings security or disaster. That was courting at its most visible in the early Middle Ages, turning desire, duty, strategy, or some mixture of all three into a bond the community would recognize. Modern romance imagines two people choosing privately and handling the paperwork later. Early medieval evidence shows almost the reverse, pages crowded with public arrangements, while private feelings remain invisible. The people at the center were neither emotionless chess pieces nor modern daters wearing rough wool. They were building a life in a world where survival depended on relationships larger than the pair. What makes their courtship seem dark is not that love was absent. It is that history preserved the promises, the cattle, the land, and the witnesses, and usually left the beating hearts off the page.